you are. Yay, now I can see. Hello, everybody. Let's see. We got Max and Josiah and LG and Noah, Tiana, and CITC Productions. I'm guessing that's Elijah behind that account. So hello and welcome to my live chat discussion thingy that I'm doing. It's really just going to do something really informal, kind of unplanned, unstructured, not really a Q&A format, but more just a discussion, because I think a big part of the learning process is discussing what you have learned, discussing what you think about something, and hearing back from others what they think about the same thing. And that way you can kind of broaden your horizons on the way that you think about a certain subject. So today I was just going to talk about directing, and I would really love it if you guys would participate as much as you can in the chat. It's not just like question and answer. I'd love to hear what you think about what I'm saying, or if you disagree, or if you've had personal experience with what I'm talking about, or if there's something in particular that you would like to discuss. I'd like to just kind of have an open format for all of that. So that's the plan. Josiah. This is Josiah pulling an editor and your brother. Yes, I know who you are. Hello. So, first off, kind of introduce myself. I'm Annie Pulling Sweat, if you don't already know who I am. I run the HomeGrown Filmmaker channel, which is a channel that's kind of devoted to learning filmmaking and documenting my process of learning filmmaking, and just putting it all out there so that other young filmmakers who are teaching themselves filmmaking can just see somebody else doing that, get experience, get ideas, that sort of thing. So I work as a director at Abundant House Films, and directing is what I've primarily done for the last 4 years, I would say. I've actually been directing for 8 years, about. I started in 2010, and I've directed 7 short films. 8 if you count Loyalty, but I don't really count Loyalty because I didn't really know what a director did. I'm credited as a director on Loyalty, but I didn't actually do the job of the director, so it doesn't really count as directing experience for me. Let me just check on what everybody's saying. So, like I said, the last 3 years have primarily been when I've been focusing on directing specifically. And it's really not up until that point that I was able to practice directing specifically, just because when you're starting out in filmmaking, you're doing so many different jobs. You're doing producer and DP and however many other things just to get your projects happening and your projects going. And I think it's really hard to learn how to be a director when you're trying to be everything else. It's hard to know exactly what the job of the director is in the midst of everything else, because it's kind of a vague job description. So the last 3 years, I've kind of devoted myself to actually figuring out what it is that the director does, what the job of the director is, and what makes a good director as opposed to a mediocre director or just an amateur director, kind of like what separates out good directors and not so good directors. So I just started educating myself. I just started analyzing films. I started listening to a lot of directors talk, so commentaries and podcasts and YouTube videos, all that sort of thing. Just getting the thought process of a director kind of more in my head so that I could get an idea of what the director is supposed to do, because I was very confused about it at first. I see a couple more people are here. There's Lily. Hi, Lily. And Johnston. Hi, Johnston. It's good to see you guys on here. So I guess I'll just start talking about directing. Let me know if there's anything in particular that you guys would like to discuss when it comes to directing. For me, directing is hard to pin down in one sense and not in another sense. The reason why it seems difficult to learn directing or to learn very specific things about directing is because it's not. Okay, half of it is very specific things that the director is supposed to do. Those very specific things are casting. So basically anything to do with the actors falls under what the director is supposed to do. So they are in charge of casting, finding the right actors to play the characters in their movie. And of course, they're in charge of directing the actors once you're on set. So directing their performances and making them comfortable and making it an environment where they can give performances. So that's like very specific. Anything else? The other thing that the director has like full jurisdiction over is completely 100% their job is blocking. And blocking does involve the camera, so they work very closely with the director of photography in planning out the blocking and planning out how to shoot the blocking. But the blocking is the director's side of it. It's how they tell the story with the characters and how they make it another piece of making it comfortable for the actors. If the blocking is just awkward and stilted, the whole scene is hard for the actors to act. So like those are some very specific things that the director is in charge of. But the rest of it is just like this big open vague space, and that's why it's hard to learn about because it's just there. You're supposed to direct a film. Like what does that mean though? Like are you in charge? Are you completely in charge? Are you in charge of everything? This is why it's hard to learn because you can't bring it down to specifics until you're working on a specific project. What the director does changes with every project and with every crew because it's different. So kind of like that vague space of what the director does, I've heard it described a couple different ways. One of the ways I talk about it is you are the creative lead of the project. So every creative decision has to go through the director at some point. That's one way that I've described it in the past that makes a lot of sense to me. Another way that I've heard it described is they're the ideas editor. Not necessarily that they have to come up with every single idea that ends up in the film, but they're the person who every single idea kind of has to run through, and they kind of edit out which ones fit the story, which ones don't fit the story, or fit where everything is at the moment. There's a lot of pieces to that are logistical as well. Like people come at you with a lot of ideas and they might fit the story, but you as the director know everything else that's going on. And so logistically, you know that can't happen or how much work that would be. There's a balance that you have to keep in mind where, yes, this might be a great idea, but is it worth the cost, the effort, and everything to actually make it happen? That's a question that I've had to answer a lot on set in the past before. It's just like, yes, we could do that, but is it important enough to spend all of this time, effort, and money on? Is it important enough to the story? So that kind of hopefully sums up some of what the director is supposed to do. It just changes. It's really hard to nail down. Kind of how I started nailing it down was by trying to see if I could watch a film and see what the director's influence on it was, if that makes sense. And I did start being able to see, like, you know, I watch films with my siblings all the time, and we point stuff out to each other like, oh, that was iffy and that didn't work so well, this and that sort of thing. And I would notice that people would start pointing things out, and they would say, oh, that's an editing problem, or that's an acting problem, or a design problem, or whatever. And I would start questioning that. I'm like, was it really, or was it actually a directing problem? And kind of like by doing that, a lot of times, a lot of times, I started kind of narrowing down how to see directing in a film. And that has been one of the biggest learning tools, I think. It's hard to know because I've done a lot of different things that have made a big difference in how I think about directing. So as I'm talking about things, guys, feel free to chip in here. I'd love to hear what you think about what I'm saying. I'm kind of hoping this will be an open discussion. Have you experienced some of what I'm talking about? How have you taught yourself directing? Anything like that, I'd really love to hear, especially if you disagree with anything that I say. I'd love to hear that because that opens up a really interesting discussion. Or if you have experienced anything differently than how I have kind of explained it. So, the director is one of the only people who, on a film shoot or working on a whole project, not just the shoot, who is there for the entire project. They're there from the moment the script is finished to the moment that the edit is finished. So, because they're kind of there for the whole process, breaking down what specifically the director does, it changes depending on where you are in the process. It changes in pre-production, and it changes in production, and obviously it changes in post-production. And that kind of follows the whole, I don't know if you guys have heard that quote before. I can't remember who did the quote, but the quote about filmmaking is telling the same story 3 times. You tell it once in pre-production, you tell it again or it changes again in production, and then it changes yet again in post-production. And so kind of the director's job amid all of that changing and everything that can possibly go wrong or just happen while you're making a project, the director's job is to make sure that you still have the story that you wanted to tell. It might change, it might evolve, but it's still the same story that you wanted to tell when you started the project. And so along the way, as everything's changing and you have all these problems and whatever else might happen, the director's job is to have the vision and to make the decisions based on that vision to keep the story what they wanted it to be in the first place, if that makes sense. Elijah says, yeah, most people don't watch films and say the directing in this film was great. I know. It's because it's that the director is the editor of ideas. And so essentially the finished product of what you see of the director's work is, here is all of the ideas I took from other people and I chose to put them in this arrangement. You know, the ideas actually came from the director of photography, the production designer, the costume designer, the editor, you know, all these people contributing ideas. What the director contributes is the collage of all those ideas together. And so seeing what the director actually contributes to a film is actually like a really big picture view. When I think of a film that has, I don't know, not bad directing, but just not solid directing, it's a film that feels incohesive. It feels like the tone is off in some places, or there's scenes that just stick out. Like when you step back and look at it from a more big picture view, that's where you can really start to see seams in the directing. And that's not always the directing. Sometimes it's, you know, their shoot went horrible for that one scene and they didn't get enough coverage, and so the editing is really choppy because they just didn't have anything else to work with. But a lot of times it's when you look at the whole thing and you go, that does not match that, and it doesn't all go together. Lily says, that's interesting. You can notice directing when you watch a film because I don't feel like I can, unless it comes across in the camera work. But in the camera work, you're never sure. Are you seeing the director or are you seeing the director of photography? And it doesn't help that a lot of like the big directors, the most famous directors, they have specific directors of photography that they always like to work with. So what you're seeing could be, oh, it's the signature style of that director, but it's actually the signature style of that director working with that director of photography. Picking those two apart, I mean, it's not really necessary to pick those two apart because they are really connected, but for the purpose of teaching yourself directing, picking those two apart is like, is there a seam? I don't see it. I don't know how to pick that apart to learn. Josiah says, I get the why is the problem happening within editing before, where I'll watch a film and won't really be able to spot the editing, even though I edit. Oh, you're saying you'll see a problem, but you won't be able to pinpoint it in the editing exactly? Is that what you're saying? Lily asks, do you have any examples of films that you can see the directing in? Okay, obviously this is easy to see because it's so stylistic, but what's that? King Arthur and the Legend of the Sword. And I believe that was Guy Ritchie. I always get Guy Ritchie and Edgar Wright's names mixed up. I don't get their styles mixed up, but I get their names mixed up with who belongs to which. But so that movie has such a unique style, and mainly where you can see it is when you step back and you look at the whole film as a whole. What I see is just disjointed sequences. So there'll be these moments and these sequences that are beautifully built. And Guy Ritchie is a very edit-heavy director. He very much shoots for the edit. So there's just these sequences where everything flows into the other, and it's absolutely, the timing is perfect, and the rhythm is perfect, and the tone is dead on. But then you step back and you look at the whole film, and it's not cohesive throughout the film. There's some really interesting sequences, but they don't match up with each other exactly. That it didn't help that the script also wasn't, well, I don't know. I don't know what the actual script was like. It might have been, I do know that they shot a lot more footage than ended up in the film. I think it was like a 4-hour film when they did the first edit. So they had to take a lot out. So it almost feels like he read the script and then went, this is a cool sequence, this is a cool sequence, this is a cool sequence, and the story actually got cut out because when you look at the whole thing, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense and the characters are not compelling. And you know, I fell asleep watching that movie because I was just like, I don't care anymore about these characters. But the sequences themselves are really interesting. So that's one where I can see the directing a lot. And it's easy because, again, he's so stylistic. Let me think. Films where I can see the directing. Something that I started noticing a lot, at the same time I started studying like how to see directing in film, I started kind of learning about blocking, because I knew that blocking was a big part of what the director was supposed to do, but I didn't really understand how it affected the story, or how to build it into the whole film, or the importance of it basically. So I started watching it, and that's because that is directly under the jurisdiction of the director. That is something that I notice a lot now, is the blocking, and that was a decision that the director made. You know, that's the thing about having a big budget and knowing what you're doing as a director. What you end up seeing on screen is, I don't think we realize as low budget amateur filmmakers how much every tiny thing that you see on screen is on purpose. And so when you kind of wrap your brain around that, as when it comes to blocking, every single movement that a actor makes was pre-planned, was practiced, was intentional. Every time the characters walk around, every time they move, every time they stop, when they get closer, when they get farther apart, all of that is choreographed, it's planned, and it's there to tell the story, and it's a part of the story. And when you kind of wrap your brain around how on purpose it is, you can start to see, again, the hand of the director in there. Especially, again, it's easy to see when it's going wrong. You watch a lot of more low budget films, and a lot of times the blocking feels choppy or uncomfortable, or, you know, the staging just isn't right. Need a drink. Okay, Grant asks, what is your process working with your DP? What things do you really appreciate from DPs you've worked with in the past? So I haven't worked with very many DPs, mostly because my brother-in-law Max is a DP, and so he's usually who I work with, not to mention that we co-direct a lot of the time. So again, this is one of those things about directing that it's really hard to be specific about, because every relationship between a director and a DP is different. And the reason it's different is because the level of experience and the natural strengths and weaknesses of the people involved really, really, play into that relationship. So for me and Max, Max is a very visual person, obviously, as a DP. I am not as visual. I'm very oriented around story and like the writing and the acting rather than the visuals. And so for me and Max, I lean very heavily on him for ideas on the visuals. That doesn't mean that like I just give him free reign. We do have a lot of discussions about the visuals, but most of it is generated from him, where I'll give kind of a general idea of what I'm wanting. So again, it comes down to those sequences. So for this sequence, I want it to be kind of more frantic, and I want like a high energy tone. And I'll often map out the arc of the sequence for him, where this is how it starts, and I want it to be a little bit slower, and then it'll build and build and build, and then we're going to have this moment here at the apex of the sequence, and then this will be the fallout. And I'll kind of like sketch that out for him. And then, I listen to him, and hopefully that will generate within him ideas on what he wants it to look like, what would be cool, what would be exciting. And again, as the editor of those ideas, I'm keeping in mind the big picture, and will that actually fit with everything? Yeah, that might be cool for that sequence, or it might be just a really cool thing to try out. But my brain is always on, is it going to fit with the whole thing? Is this going to match? So that'll be that's kind of our process. We take it scene by scene and sequence by sequence. That's before storyboarding. That's before shot listing. That's just kind of like roughing it out, where we just kind of go through the script and talk through all of the pieces of it and what he's seeing. So that's pre-production anyway. And the more I learn about filmmaking, the more team members that we're able to bring onto a film, which we've been really, really fortunate to find so many people and know so many people who are interested in film that we can fill out our crews really well. The more I've realized that it's very important to make as many creative decisions in pre-production as you can. I know definitely a couple years ago, just when I was starting out and all of that, I had an attitude of, we'll just figure this out when we'll go to set. Or, I knew that you were supposed to storyboard. I knew that you were supposed to shot list, but I still had that mindset going, we'll just kind of find our way when we get to set. We'll see what it's actually like on set and we'll be able to put it all together. But having so many more people involved means so much more planning, and so many more people need to be in the loop, and so much more time is wasted when you're on set and have to make creative decisions. So everything that we've been working on for the last couple of years has been making as many decisions in pre-production as possible. And so a lot of the dynamic between me and Max as a director and a DP is all in pre-production, because we're making as many decisions together as we can before we ever get to set. That allows him to be very prepared, know what gear he's going to need for what day. We're not just throwing anything out there out of the blue. Not that we can't. There's definitely times where we've had to scrap the plan. We're doing something different. But mostly on set these days, it's very minor changes, like what lens do you want for this shot? And no, I want it a little bit closer than that. And, the blocking's all figured out before we get there. The camera angles are worked out before we ever get there. So most of the dynamic is actually now in pre-production. LGS, what is director of photography? So director of photography is the person who is in charge of photography. So they work with the director. It's kind of like if you separate out all the things that need to happen on set. The director's in charge of the actors. Once you actually get on set, that's like the main job of the director, is to make sure that the actors know what the heck is going on, that they're ready, they have everything they need, that they know the blocking, all of that stuff. And then the director of photography is in charge of all the cameras. So they bring in all the gear, they set up all the gear. They are often the person handling the camera. But in pre-production, they do a lot of work to prepare for that, obviously. So they're a big part of planning out the shot list and the storyboards and just the visual look of the film. When you have more money and have a chance to work with lighting, which is just where we're starting to get where we need to do lighting and have more lighting. The director of photography is also in charge of lighting. So I should say that the creative head of lighting. So they'll be setting up the shot and they'll be like, okay, I want light here and coming from there and coming through this window, and I don't want that lamp on, and we need to shade that. And then there's somebody else on set called the gaffer who actually makes all of that happen. So the DP is creatively deciding what should happen. The gaffer is physically and logistically making it happen, if that makes sense. So they're like the tech bridge from the director into the technical side of filmmaking. Just I said what Lily asked. What is a film you saw bad directing, and what is one you noticed good directing? Um, Bad directing. It's like not usually a whole film. Sometimes it's just sequences. Sometimes it's just. I notice I've been watching a lot of Hallmark movies recently, and that's a big realm of movies that you can watch to learn how not to do directing. It's usually a lot of stilted blocking or bad acting. You know, most of the time when you see bad acting, it's not the actors, it's the director. A really good example of bad directing is the last Airbender movie. Oh my goodness. This is actually one of the things that got me really started on the path of focusing on learning directing. There is I think it's 3 videos long essay on YouTube done by one of my favorite video essayers, whose name I just forgot. Just Right. Just Right, right as in write with a pen, so WRITE. Just Right made a 3-video essay on the last Airbender movie was directed by M. Night Shyamalan. And one of those episodes in the essay is specifically dedicated to the directing of that film and what a mess it was. And I really learned a lot from watching that video. I'll find somewhere to link it because it's a really good example of how a director's style affects a film, because watching that video and seeing kind of like how he broke down the issues with that movie, he pointed out how the issues are actually all good decisions that he made if he were making another movie. You know, decisions that totally fit his style, the way that he has directed every other movie that he has directed, and how it just didn't work for that movie. So I found that a really interesting video because I was like, whoa, that makes a lot more sense, you know, especially as if you're thinking about how to make a living as a director and how do you get hired onto movies as a director and what producers are looking for when they hire a director for a specific movie. And because they hired him and he was not the right fit. That was like the main issue with that movie. One film that you noticed good directing. I love J.J. Abrams directing. Now that might just be my personal, sorry, my personal opinion or preference that I like his directing, but I really, really do. I've studied a lot of his blocking because he is great at blocking. Like, I know a lot of people for studying blocking, they point people to Steven Spielberg because he's also the king of blocking. But Steven Spielberg's style is much slower in general, or it's a lot of long takes. It's a lot of slow movements sometimes. And J.J. Abrams feels like a more modern, more hip version of that. Like, he does a lot of interesting things with blocking, but it's a lot faster and a lot more interesting. So that's The Force Awakens, the 2009 Star Trek movie, Star Trek Into Darkness. He did not direct the 3rd Star Trek movie. So it's just those first 2. But if you watch the directing and you watch the characters and the cohesiveness of those films, I love his style of directing. I'm trying to think. You know, a lot of people had problems with The Force Awakens, but I really liked the directing of it, for sure. Because, like, the acting. the acting. When you look at it, it's just really comfortable and it feels more real. And it's not as, there's some like really cheesy lines. Okay, some really cheesy lines in The Force Awakens, but the acting pulls it off. And that's often the sign of a really good director, I think, because they got the actor to the place, or they got the whole story to the place where saying those really cheesy lines didn't break the movie or take you out of the moment, and the actors weren't terribly uncomfortable. You know, good actors, what's that saying? Bad acting can ruin a good script, but good actors can't save a bad one. I don't know. It's something like that. You're stuck. Anyway, if you're interested in J.J. Abrams, you can watch those films for looking at directing. Try Napoleon Dynamite. That's a really disconnected movie. Yes, I saw that for the first time last year. I believe it was last year. And that movie is supposed to be disconnected, though. Like, I didn't love it, sorry to say, but it was a style. You know, the story was disconnected, the plot was disconnected, but it wasn't disconnected tone-wise. It all fit together and it all was cohesive when you look at the whole thing. Not a cohesive story or a compelling story even, but it was cohesive film, I think. Ryan asks, what's your favorite project you've worked on? It's a toss-up between Descent and Weeping Willow. Because, like, my first instinct was to say Descent, which is our newest one that we just did this year. Like, Descent was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of new things, but it was also very stressful. So, on those terms, I was like, I wouldn't want to put myself back in those shoes again. Weeping Willow is more nostalgic in my head, I guess. That it was the first big film that we did, and it's one of those things that's just like, I remember having a lot of fun with it. I'm sure it was very stressful at the time, but looking back at it now, we were just babies and we didn't know what we were doing, and it was all such an adventure and fun. Now it's a little bit more stressful, and we're always pushing ourselves, and we got bigger teams, and when you have more people relying on you to, you know, actually know your stuff and come out with a product at the end of it, it just gets a little bit more stressful. Ellie asks, what's your experience been with building a film crew? What has your guys' experiences been with building film crews? I'm very curious about that, because it's a question that we get a lot of, like, how do I find people who are interested in filmmaking? How do I build a crew? And I'm like, I don't know. It just kind of happened to us. Obviously, our main crew started out just our family, and that one's kind of obvious. But I would say, looking at it from having worked with larger crews and having more of a professional look at it than I did, 2-3 years ago, I would say the biggest thing that has changed and that I really care about is, it used to be that I would, we get a project together and it kind of just like post to all of my friends who I knew were interested in filmmaking, and I'd go, hey, I need all of these jobs filled. Who's interested? It was kind of like a free-for-all situation. And not that that was a bad thing. That was a good way for us to get to know each other as friends a little bit better and to know what everyone is interested in. And it gave people a chance to volunteer for things that they might not normally volunteer for just because they were interested in trying it out. So it was a good season. But now I care way more about like actually picking who I'm putting in what spots and not just like a free-for-all out there. Obviously that kind of depends on knowing the people that you're going to work with. I want to know how the people that I'm asking to be in particular positions, how they handle creative discussions, what they're like to collaborate with, how much they care about their jobs. So, sometimes when you're just shooting with your friends, you just have people who are like, hey, I want to help, don't really know where I'm fit in or anything. And so you give them a job and they do a good job, but they don't actually care they're not invested in their job. And so you're not going to get the same collaboration as you are going to get with someone who actually really knows their stuff and is very invested in that particular area. Someone who is highly, highly invested in cinematography and you ask them to be your DP, they're going to be creatively coming up with their own ideas and they're going to come to your meetings with inspiration and passion for what they want to do. And that makes for a much easier dialogue than everything coming from you as the director. I want this, I want this, I want this, and having to be the source of everything yourself is hard collaboratively, I guess. So I become more picky, I guess. Not really picky, just I care a lot about which people are going into which positions now. So that's been our recent experience with building film crews. Because collaboration is such a huge part of directing. I'm sure you guys have heard this before, but 95% of directing is communication. And so picking who you're going to be communicating with is important. It's just like casting. People say that too. 90% of directing is the casting. It's picking the people who you're going to be communicating with makes such a difference. I heard somebody I know heard a director say this. I'm trying to remember it. It was the director's job really is to create the environment so that everyone else can be creative. And again, it's the idea of the director is the idea editor. They're not the source of all the ideas. They're the editor of all the ideas. And so it's their job to create the environment and create the team that everyone feels comfortable and welcome collaborating in, which means where no one gets offended or feels like they have to have their ideas accepted or gets mad when their ideas don't get accepted, or it's really hard to have creative discussions when people have attachment to their ideas going into it. And it definitely shuts it down. If one person in your group is attached to ideas, then everyone in the group feels bad about shutting down their ideas if they don't fit with the story. It really does need to be an open environment where, hey, we're all just plopping ideas down. It's a free-for-all. Everyone can disagree. Anyone can disagree. Anyone can agree. And no one has to be afraid of the relational aspect. So it's kind of the director's job to make that environment and to put together the team that will have that environment. So that requires a lot of communication and that requires a lot of people skills. So that's a huge part of directing is people skills. You need the same people skills for actors as well, because that's a big part of directing actors is making them comfortable and figuring out what is not making them comfortable if they're uncomfortable. So that can be a lot of different things, and it just requires a lot of talking. And you get to the point where you're working with more professional actors, they're going to be a lot better at handling, obviously, the situation and the pressure of acting. When you're working with someone who's never acted before, they can get really uncomfortable just being in front of the camera. Obviously, it's like a lot of people just staring at them, and they have to do some really crazy stuff. You start working with more professional actors and they know how to deal with that, and you don't have to help them deal with that quite so much. But there's always going to be some situations where they're not comfortable, or sometimes it's the blocking, sometimes it's they just don't know what's going on, just making, and you have to be able to read that, because some actors won't tell you. They'll just try and keep going and keep doing, even though they're uncomfortable, but it's messing up the film and their acting. And so you as the director have to be really watch them and sense from them what's going on with them. And that's another people skills. Lots and lots of people skills. Elijah says, building film crews for me is easier when I've worked on other people's film sets. You make a lot of connections that way, and you also know what it's like to work with these people. Amen. You don't really know a person from a 10-minute conversation about how you both like filmmaking. How you really learn how someone is when you work with them. And especially collaboratively and creatively. Like, that's a whole another ball of wax. And so working on other people's sets to get an idea of how people actually handle being on set and handle working with a crew, definitely something to do and a good way to get a judge of people. There's a lot of people that we've worked with, in the Seattle film community, and just we'll be on different sets. We're like, wow, I really like working with that person. That person was not great to work with. We're never going to invite them onto one of our sets. Or, that gives you so much more to judge on. It's not really judge. Like, I don't mean judgment as in you're judging them as a person. It's just discernment on who you're bringing onto your sets. Again, who's going to work with you well, collaboratively. Working with them gives you so much more to go on than a 10-minute conversation. Ryan asks, would you agree with Ryan Connolly's statement that your camera really doesn't matter? Here's what I've learned over the last couple of years as we've been upgrading a lot of our equipment. No, it doesn't really matter creatively. Like, it doesn't take away from your ability to be creative or do something interesting, or, even the quality of your finished film. You can still tell a great story with an iPhone. That's been done a lot of times now. It's totally possible. It doesn't really matter. Where upgrading your equipment and, putting more money into it, into everything, not just your camera, your lenses, your lighting, your design as well, your props, your costumes, all of that stuff. What money gets you is ease and choices. So, usually the more expensive of a camera you're getting, the more it's specialized to film. Obviously, you have like your iPhone, which is just meant for the most part just to shoot pictures like any normal person would, and you upgrade to a DSLR. Those are for photography and videography, and so they're not really specialized to filmmaking. I mean, you can get ones that are more leaning that way than the others, but you get into the next level where you're past DSLRs into actual film cameras. They're actually designed to do film and give you choices when it comes to film. So it's the same when you start upgrading from like DIY. I always do that wrong. Do it yourself. Yeah, DIY. I always say DIY for some reason. Anyway, when you upgrade from DIY equipment, to professional standard or more expensive equipment, what it gets you is ease. It's designed to do the thing that it's doing, and you don't have so many problems with it, and you don't have to work around with lots of rubber bands and duct tape. Like, I've been there. We've all done, we've done that a lot in our films, working with really cheap equipment. But what money gets you is ease, which in the end saves you time, which is important when you start working with more people, because then you're not taking up everybody's time. And when you start actually spending a lot of money on films, time is important because it costs money to have all of those people together and to keep them working. You're paying them by the day, by the hour. If you end up going long, you have to pay them more. So it's Like, that's what you get with more money. It's not more creative choices. It doesn't automatically make your creative end product and your creative output better. What it gives you is better tools. That's all. Choices and less problems. Oh yeah, Rachel said it was Kenny Ortega who was talking about, who's the director of High School Musical, was talking about how the director's job is to make the environment where everyone feels comfortable being creative and giving out ideas. Elijah says, yeah, also going to film festivals is a big thing for, yeah, meeting people and building crews. But I have the, I met some people at film festivals and stuff, but again, the issue is at film festivals, you can only talk. You talk about film. And to some extent, you can see other people's work at film festivals, which is great. But nothing's going to replace that experience of actually working with them. So it's kind of been our policy, because it's not like a strict rule or anything, but our mode of operation for that. We don't actually bring anyone into our crew, like the more high level positions of the crew, the director of photography, the production designer, the director, the producer, those are like the top people who work really closely together. We don't actually ask people to come into that until we've worked with them, because it's very important to know what it's like to collaborate with them. Asking someone to come act for a couple days or just to be on set or come do some small part of it or some smaller part of the crew, that's a good way to get experience to work with them. But bringing them into the most collaborative parts is something that it's hard to feel comfortable doing until you've actually worked with them. LG says, I've only filmed with 4 friends who live in Washington, and that's only for 2 days in the summer. Otherwise, I've only had either my brother or another friend of mine, which I met rather recently. It's really hard. Yep, I know. It's hard to find people who are as invested in filmmaking as you are, and who are willing to put the time and work in. That's for sure. But I've actually been putting some more thought into this. I think there's a lot more positions in filmmaking that don't actually have very much to do with film than people realize. So, the producer, the caterer, the costume designer, those people don't have to be interested in film. They just have to be interested in their area of filmmaking. That's what happened with my sister, Rachel. She wasn't interested in filmmaking hardly at all, but she's a serial entrepreneur is what we call her. She accidentally makes businesses all the time. She's very organized. She's planned many events. And so it was like, when we got to the point we needed a producer, it was like, she was like, well, I can do that. Like, I know how to do that. I know how to do that. I know how to organize huge groups of people and a lot of different elements and be on a schedule and be on time. And so it didn't actually have anything to do with film. And so I think there's a lot more jobs in filmmaking like that than people realize. And so when you're looking for people who are interested in filmmaking to come be a part of your projects, often the opening statement can be, hey, who is interested in filmmaking? And all of the people who would be really good at those jobs but aren't interested in filmmaking, they're not going to say anything. They're not going to be, yeah, I'm interested in filmmaking, because they're not. But they're still there. So something that I've been thinking about encouraging young people who have a hard time finding collaborators is to notice what other people are really good at and what other people enjoy doing, and see if that matches in with filmmaking, rather than trying to find out who's interested in filmmaking. Because when you go, who's interested in filmmaking, you get a whole bunch of directors and DPs, and you can't make a whole crew out of directors and directors of photography. you need a lot of other people. So I would say look for people who are interested in other stuff that might work alongside really well, like designers. The whole art department, it's not really actually related to film very much. Some of it is how, the technical side of how does this look on film and how to build a set and how to portray stuff on film. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but a lot of it is design. It's art, it's colors and textures and styles. And so if you have someone who's interested in interior design or drawing or painting or anything like that, they're gonna know a lot about art, even if they don't know anything about filmmaking. Anyway, food for thought. Ryan asks, as a Christian filmmaker, how do you feel about collaborating with unbelievers? I don't have an issue with it. I care way more about how people relate than, whether they're a Christian or not, or stated Christian or not. There's some really great people that I know that are not Christians, but they are awesome collaborators and they know a ton about film. And so they're great to have on board. And as long as they're comfortable with anything that we're doing, I'm the director, these are our family's film. We have total creative control over what it is we're outputting. And so there's not really an issue there as far as I'm concerned. That's my thoughts on it anyway. If they like to collaborate with us and we like to collaborate with them, I don't have an issue with it. Nicholas asks, do film projects cost a lot? What are some things you can do to minimize the cost? So I'm thinking that we need to have another one of these on producing at some point. I want to have more live chats like this. I've been thinking about doing one on editing and having Josiah come in and talk about that, and maybe another one on photography or cinematography, have Max come in. Anything else that you guys would like to know about, I'll see if I can have someone come talk about it, because I'm not an expert on anything really. But producing might be a good one to do, and Rachel could come talk about producing. But anyway, do film projects cost a lot? Those questions are actually producer questions, but yes, films cost a lot. Obviously it depends on the length of the film. Anytime you're adding more shooting time onto your project, it's going to cost more money because it's going to be more locations, more actors, more food that you have to feed your crew with. If you're paying your crew, it's, more wages that you have to pay your crew. Most crew gets paid per day. So the more days you have, the more expensive it is. All of that really, really adds up. A lot of locations you have to pay, a renting fee. Obviously, if you're building your costumes, they're going to cost money. Or if you're making your costumes, if you're making your props, if you're making your sets, all of that's going to cost money. And it quickly racks up. The biggest cost is wages, for sure. And obviously that depends on how many people you have on your project, how many people you're paying, and again, for how long. So one of the biggest ways to save on a project is to do volunteer only. That's what we've done for the longest time. Most of the people who work on our sets are completely at the level where they should be paid money, though. So it starts to feel like hard to ask them. I know they're having a fun time and I know it's a cool project and we're all having fun together and it's great, but it's like, really, they should be paid for the work that they're doing because it's so good. So doing volunteer only obviously is one way that you save a lot of money. Working with things that you already have. So when you have no money, this is called no budget filmmaking. Write and plan for locations that you can get for free, that you already have access to, your backyard, state parks, anywhere that other people's houses that you can shoot in, stuff like that. Free. Do costumes out of your own closet or out of closets of your friends and actors. When you're working with actors who have been doing stuff for a while, they actually, part of their job, their career, is to have a closet full of clothes that will work for a lot of films. So usually when you're talking to an actor, you'll kind of go like, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? And they'll actually have a lot of stuff in their own closet, clothes that will actually fit them. But that's if you're working with an actor who's actually been acting for a while. We've done a lot of shopping at thrift stores, stuff like that, just trying to get the cheapest thing possible. Obviously, the more unique the design, so period design, fantasy design, sci-fi design, retro, or what's that called? My brain does not keep words very well. What's that called? You know, past, from the past. I can't believe I forgot the word. That sort of stuff. Anytime you're not working within our current world, it's going to cost more money because you're going to have to provide everything, and it's going to be more custom. And also, if you care a lot about the design, like what colors you're using and just how everything looks, that's always going to cost more money. Again, same principle as with gear. The more money you're able to put into it, the more choices you have and the easier it is. So what you end up with when you don't have money is just, you have to do a lot of workarounds, and it can be a lot more work sometimes. But that's a really good experience. So vintage, that's, at least is vintage. That's close to the right word. Period. That's the word I was looking for. Period films. If you're doing a period film, it's going to cost more money. So the reason why we have not done a big fantasy short film as of yet is because we looked at the cost of doing that and went, oh, we don't have the money for that yet, to do something to the scale that we would want to do anyway. So hopefully that answered that question. I'm going to see if I can get Rachel to do a producing live stream. That could be kind of fun if y'all have a lot of questions about that. And obviously we can talk about that a lot more. One Douglas Studio says, what's the biggest challenge you've had to overcome as a director? I think that's not going to be the same for every director, but for me, I am not a particular person in the slightest. I am very easygoing. I don't like making decisions. I don't have strong preference, is how I would say it. So I usually kind of leave up preference to other people. Now, as a director, that's a big problem because your job is to make decisions. This is all you do all day long when you're directing a film. How would you like this? What would be better for this? What color for this? What type for that? What shape for that? Where are they going to sit? How are we going to shoot it? Decisions. And so I used to kind of think that, to be too picky was a bad thing, that it caused a lot of trouble for the people I was working with if I was too picky, or if and sometimes, a lot of times they just didn't have opinions about it. That's still true. But that's something that I've overcome a lot. And I've become way more picky about filmmaking as the years have gone by, because I realized that it really wasn't helpful. It really wasn't a good thing to do as a collaborator and as a director to my crew and to the people I was working with, because they really needed me to make firm decisions. That's what I was there for. So for me to constantly go, oh, I don't really know. What do you, do whatever you want, be kind of wishy-washy about it. It wasn't helpful to anyone. And it definitely didn't end up with a cohesive result, which is what I was just talking about with being able to see the director's hand on everything. Being wishy-washy and not very particular about what you're choosing doesn't give you a cohesive end product. So that's something I've worked hard to overcome, to actually come up with opinions and have them. And most of the time I don't have to, because I'm working with people who do have opinions. Most of the time now is my trick. When somebody comes to me with a question like, hey, what do you think is better? What color do you want for the costumes? Any sort of decision like that. I usually turn it around right back on them. I go, what do you think about this? And if you are working with someone who is invested in it, they've already thought about it, they already have a favorite opinion, and they already have a reason why that's their favorite opinion. And so they'll be able to tell you. And from their opinion, I'll be able to go to see if I agree or disagree. And a lot of times I agree because I didn't have an opinion. So again, it's that editor of ideas going on. I don't have to generate all the ideas. I don't have to generate all the decisions, but I do have to have a final say. I do actually have to say, we are doing this. We are doing this. We are doing this. Because if no decision is made, there's no way to move forward. That's the biggest thing for me. I know some people have the opposite problem. They're too particular, which people find hard to collaborate with because they feel like they don't ever have a creative say in anything. If a director comes in and they already have it all figured out and there's no room for actually collaborating with everybody, that's a problem. And to some degree, like, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with being very particular and having strong opinions at all. But it's a little bit arrogant to think that you have all of the best ideas, that because you have it all figured out, nobody has anything to add. Two brains on something are always going to be better than one. The more people you have giving ideas, you have more choices, and you can kind of creatively bounce off each other. So there's nothing wrong with having strong opinions. You need strong opinions. You need firm decisions. But there's kind of both ends of the spectrum. I was on the far easygoing, loose end of the spectrum. There's also the really, really particular, really strict end of the spectrum. Beginner's Guide to Ask, do you live in Michigan? No, I live in Idaho, at the very, very western edge of Idaho. Elijah says, how have you done casting in your short films? Have you put casting calls out on the internet, or have you just worked with people you know? We've done a variety of things. Never done a casting call just out on the internet. Again, because we're particular about who we ask onto our sets. I should say never just put one out like on Craigslist or to the general internet. Something we did for Weeping Willow when we needed 12 to 18-year-olds. We contacted all of the local homeschool associations. We're homeschooled. And we said, hey, we need all these people to come out and run in the cold for a day for Hunger Games fan film. And there were a lot of people who were really interested in doing that. So that's something we've continued to do, is we always reach out to the homeschool associations. Once you start working on projects and you get to know people who know people who know people who know people, we've met a lot of actors that way. And so a lot of times I'll have in mind specific actors that I want to audition for roles that I've worked with before, or know someone who has worked with before and, has good things to say about them. Yeah, there's a lot of that. Casting is interesting. Like, most of the casting that I've done is casting people who've never acted before, which is very, very different from auditioning people who've never acted before, which is very different from auditioning people who have done it lots, who have acted quite a bit. It's a very different process. So it's hard to know what to talk about on that one. Think, have a tendency to work with people that we worked with before, just because they're good to work with, and it's a two-way street too. That they had a good time working with you as well, and so they're more likely to do it for free or to do it for cheap, or just do volunteer stuff. If you treat people well, they're gonna want to come back. It's the way it goes. I'm gonna probably sign off here pretty soon. Uh, anything else y'all want to cover before we go? I want to make sure I didn't miss any. That is directing. Oh, wait, did I have something else to say about learning directing? Oh, yeah. Something that I did also to learn directing is work on other people's sets. And I went through a season where I would try, I just do volunteer work on other people's sets. And I would try to get a job as close to the director as I could. So usually that ended up being like second assistant camera, where I was just running slate. But it allowed me to be on set and actually see the director directing actors, because I realized that directing is very subjective. Everyone directs differently, everyone has different preferences, and that's why it's hard to talk about, because there's no set formula. It's kind of like writing, only there's a lot more material about how to write and a lot more methods on how to write, and it can be really confusing to try and study how to write because there's so much out there. But that's because it's subjective and everyone's different. Directing's the same. It's subjective. It's like, how do you make art come out of you? There's not really an answer to that or a method to that that's going to fit everyone. So something that I did to kind of get an idea of what directing was just I realized that I needed to see a lot of directors, a lot of different directors. I couldn't watch the same people over and over again, or I was just going to end up being a copy of them. So I started getting as many jobs as I could close to the camera. Sometimes that was just like the director's assistant. I got them water and I held their clipboard and did whatever they needed. Sometimes that was second AC. And it allowed me to stay close to them for the entire shoot. And I learned a lot that way, a lot of methods that I liked, a lot of things that I was like, that wouldn't work for me, or I didn't think that worked very well as a director. And that gave me a lot more, I don't know, more of a picture of what I needed to be doing as a director. So obviously nothing's going to beat just doing it and getting experience doing it and learning what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And hopefully as you're doing that, you'll have people who you're working with who you trust to give you feedback on that. People you can ask, did you like collaborating with me? Was there issues? Was there something more that I could have been doing? What went right? What went wrong? That sort of thing. Hopefully you had someone close to you who you trust to have an opinion on that, because you'll learn a lot that way. It's not all in your own head. So nothing's going to beat that real experience, but there's also learning from other people, learning from other sources. It's all going to be a mixture of that, or in my case anyway. Daniel asks, what are some things that other departments could do to make the director's job easier? Good question. I don't really know. Okay, I know for sure what makes the director's job hard, because it's such a communication heavy job and a people skills job. What makes it difficult is when people are difficult. So that can be difficult to communicate with, they're confusing to communicate with, or they don't get back to you very quickly, or just there's 1,000 different reasons why someone can be difficult to communicate with. Obviously, if someone is getting offended all the time, or if I as a director have to step around someone's buttons to get a good product, that's very frustrating, because what I care about is the film and making it the best that it can be. And obviously I care about the people too, but we're all there to make a film. And it's frustrating to have to step around a certain person's, I don't know, thin ice, I don't know what you'd call it. That slows everything down. It just makes it difficult. So all of the other people in the crew coming to any meetings, set, anything that you're doing toward the film with the mindset that, hey, we're there for the film. We're all there to serve the purpose of making the film the best that it can be. It makes the director's job a lot easier to mediate between everyone, because if that's the ultimate motivation, it's fun and it's collaborative and it's creative and it's rewarding. Otherwise, it's just a lot of work on trying to make people work together. A beginner's guide too says use the chain of command. That's actually really correct too. Less so in pre-production, again, because there's a lot of time in pre-production to sort things out and to work things out, and it doesn't really matter if you unknowingly kind of skip the chain of command. There is a direct chain of command on film sets, but on set, where time is of the essence, it is very, very important for everyone to stick to their chains of command. There's actually the first AD on set, it's the first assistant director, is one of their primary jobs is to protect the director from questions that they don't need to answer, because there's so many questions that they do need to answer. There's someone actually in charge of fielding out questions that just don't need to get to them. So yes, using the chain of command, it's important for everyone on set to know who they're supposed to go to if they're confused, if they have questions, if they have, ideas to use. There are very clear chains of command, and it's that way to make it productive and efficient, not really to I'm on top and I'm in charge and you can't talk to me because I'm the director. It's not in that way at all. It's to make it efficient and productive and to be the best that it can be, But, once you set that up, everyone's pretty good about making sure that they follow that chain of command. I haven't had a lot of people who have, it's most aggravating on set where you're like, I'm trying to think of 6 different things right now, and somebody is asking me about how they should lay out lunch. It's like, I don't really need to be thinking about that. So that's aggravating, but it doesn't happen very often if your crew kind of knows what they're doing. Beginner's Guide 2 says, which is more important, good directing or good editing and color correction? They're important, but they're all important. But the director has a lot of say in the editing and the color correction, and those things need to be cohesive with everything else, which is why the director has a lot of jurisdiction over them, because that's their job. So it depends. I think that you can have good editing and good color correction and bad directing, and it can be totally messed up because of the bad direction, because the editing doesn't fit the style of the film and the color correction is not cohesive throughout and it doesn't fit the style of the film. Those are failings of the director, and so that can totally ruin a scene or a sequence or an entire film. But if a good director is working with a bad editor and a bad color corrector, you're still going to end up with a bad end product. So it's hopefully you have the best team that you can get your hands on either way. All right, I am going to sign off here. It was great talking with y'all. I hope this is helpful to you. Thank you to everybody who is here and talking with me. It was very fun. Very fun to just talk and chat and get it all going in my brain, I guess. Hopefully, same for you. I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. And I'll see you on the next one. I'm not sure what it will be or when it will be, but I will keep you updated. I'm Annie Pulling Sweat, and I'm a homegrown filmmaker. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!